My name's Walter Mowat. I'm the Soul Food in the UK Director for Scotland. And the other co-host for the evening is Nia Williams. Nia?
And I'm the Slow Food Director for Wales, and I live in North Wales, but I'm from South West Wales. Nobody around here speaks like I do, by the way.
And the other person we have live on the event is Wendy Barry, who will be doing the first talk. So Wendy, you want to say hello just now?
Hi, everybody. I'm sitting here in Fife, and I'm leader for the Arc of Taste in Scotland.
Okay, well, I'm sitting in Edinburgh, which is still cold and there's still snow on the ground. Not a lot, but it's still there in the high ground. For the session here, the usual rules apply. If you want to ask a question, then you have to use the question chat button at the bottom. If there's specific things which, I mean, that won't immediately necessarily raise a response, but if there's a particular immediate clarification required, then we can answer that straight away. But if there's something which looks like it's going to head into a long drawn out conversation, I think I would like to park that towards the end. Okay? Right. Yeah, that's all of the admin done. So we've slightly restructured the running order for today, and we're going to put all of the food up front, which seems like a good thing to do in general. The traditional aspects of it, the reason that we're actually having the celebration, the appropriate anniversaries, will come as a small interlude in the middle, and then we move into dairy farming, not quite as Burns would have seen it, but quite close, I think. Certainly the output is close. Without any further ado, I'll hand across to Wendy and allow her to tell us the inside secrets about the haggis.
Good evening. A little bit about the chieftain of the pudding race. There's a lovely lady, Celia Pickup, who has a guest house at Craigadam near Castle Douglas. And she has this wonderful traditional dining room, and haggis is something she often serves her guests. And when they ask her about it, she tells them how they run around the hills with one leg shorter than the other, and they want to go and take a picture. And she tells them they're very, very shy, and it's just impossible to take a picture. So the legend lives on, and such legends exist all over Scotland. We're very fond of these little darling creatures. There are various legends as to where, or people claiming who might have had it first. And I go with the Scandinavian route. I am a little bit biased with a Swede sitting beside me, but I'm definitely going for the Scandinavian route. Clarissa Dixon Wright, who was a lovely lady, she couldn't find any evidence that actually, the French could claim all that much. And there's quite a lot of likelihood in the Scandinavian tale. I mean, after all, we've been trading with them for 10,000 years. And, back 6,000 years before Christ, they could actually walk between the two. Dogger lands were still there. So I think there's a really strong connection there that although they weren't always friendly, we did trade and they did settle. And I think during these ancient times, a lot of dishes and language was traded. Scandinavia have a dish identical to haggis, which these days in Sweden is called pulsa, but in Norway is called hakkamot, which is quite similar again. So when they come over to Scotland, they know exactly what the haggis is, and they're ready to have a whiskey with it as well. And we generally think of associating haggis with meat, with sheep meat, mutton. But in fact, I firmly believe that it would have been made with whatever they had. You don't sort of select an animal in those days. You use everything. Nothing is wasted, and it's what you have. So if you've had a good day's hunting, it might well be venison that you've used. Otherwise, it could well be one of your sheep. It could likely be cow. It could even be goat, because a lot of the Highland smallholders actually had goats. So there was, all types of ruminant could be used for the haggis. And it was made with the pluck and the offal. The pluck is the name for the offal, which is what we do today. So that would be heart, liver, lungs, kidneys were often used. Now the liver and kidneys could be grilled or skewered and eaten over an open fire. But generally offal itself has got such a short shelf life. It's easier to bundle it all together. And the lungs and the heart, they need further cooking. You can't just grill them on a skewer. So by putting all the offal together, chopping it up with spices, with oatmeal, probably some onion, certainly some salt, and then mix it together with sufficient of the stock that you cook the meat in to give it that nice texture that you want, that it'll hold together. Then you would put it inside a stomach casing, which is known as a maw or a paunch. And that would be a really wholesome way of eating these things that needed cooked immediately. And it would be ideal for a cold climate. You cook the perishable things first, use them up. It's totally logical. And of course, we take spices for granted these days, but, you know, they wouldn't be finding some of the spices, the cloves and the things that we hear about or see on the labels of some of the haggis these days. They would have used what they had. And horseradish was the pepper of the north. We have wild caraway up here. We have wild marjoram. We have sweet cicely. And of course, we have sea salt. And indeed, maybe in Ayrshire, you know, it was the forerunner of the blackthorn sea salt, you know, on that salt pans road. You know, there was salt panning all up and down where Robbie Burns lived, and over on the East Coast as well. So they would have salt, but they wouldn't have the pepper that we use today. It may well have been the horseradish. So they would have had it spicy, but it would have been maybe slightly different. And we traditionally serve it with clapshot, which is a mash of turnips and potatoes. And that's in itself is quite interesting, because Scotland, and we don't have an Irish representative here as far as I know, but you know, we can't miss the Irish out of this. They're very, very fond of their tatties too, and I bet Nia's fond of her tatties. Yeah, a nod there. But Scotland and Northern Britain is famous for its clean tatties. You know, they were blight free. That cold air meant you didn't get the same diseases that other places did. So we've got a bit of a glitch in that just now because of Brexit, but you ask Andrew Ski up in Ochterhouse and he'll tell you, you know, Scotland's potatoes are world famous, and had it not been for the you-know-what on January the 1st, he would be exporting all over Europe right now. And the turnips are really interesting too, because actually the turnip has Nordic roots. When it was the Swedes that commercialized turnips and brought them over, the neeps we know today, because they were frost-free. They could be used for livestock and for human beings. Whereas the little white turnips that we have in Scotland are not frost-free, so they're more seasonal. So it's the Swedes that actually developed the yellow turnip that we have. And they started life in the late 17th century on farmland that is now part of Finland. But its popularity spread in Scotland because it's such a hardy brassica. And in fact, there was a guy called Charles Townshend, who lived from 1674 to 1738, and he was a politician. But although his politics were highly regarded, he was a Whig, I think, but in actual fact, he's famous for being called Turnip Townshend, because he brought that Swede, the turnip, Swede, not him, to Britain. And it was because he developed the 4-crop rotation, and this idea that if you rotate your crops, including a brassica, then you could improve the soil health and also have a winter crop that you could feed livestock. And that suddenly meant you didn't have to kill all your animals in the autumn, or not all your animals, but lots of your animals, because you couldn't afford to feed them. So he was an absolute trailblazer in the agricultural revolution in the early 18th century, which I think is rather interesting for a slow food event. Now these neeps, as we call them in Scotland, or tumshies, as we call them in Scotland, are known as kollerot in Sweden, but interestingly, they're known as neeper in Norway. And I don't think that's any coincidence, because that's, you know, again, these Nordic roots of many of our words. And if you go over the border into England and ask for a turnip, they haven't got a clue. Not a clue until you say a Swede, because my daughter went to Newcastle Uni, and none of the shops could sell her turnips for a burn supper for her pals in Newcastle until she called me on the mobile phone, and I said, try asking for a Swede, and that worked. So it is quite bizarre. I like mine mashed and steaming hot, my neeps. But when we were talking about it and doing this little talk, Lucy was telling me that in the playground every morning at primary school, they got given a slice of raw turnip when they went out into the winter playground in Sweden. I think they're a pretty hardy bunch. I'd rather have my little bottle of milk we had, not a slice of cold turnip. But that's what they got in Sweden. Haggis is mentioned as early as 1390 in a written recipe book, which is earlier than they said on Radio 4 this morning. I would just hasten to add if anyone heard that. And by 18th century, it was well established. And when Burns wrote his address to the Haggis in 1786, the deed was done and the rest is history. It was never mentioned till about the late 1800s that haggis was linked with turnips, but given what they were growing in Scotland and given the haggis was around, I think possibly we just didn't have time to write about it. For our Burns supper tonight, I suggested where you could source your haggis, and including some Ark of Taste ingredients. And John Lawson's The Butchers, who also are one of two people that make the fresh blood black pudding for the Ark of Taste, are collaborating with Jack at Ardagh Hebridean sheep and have made a lovely haggis with the Hebridean sheep. Mine are put aside because I can't get to West Lothian with lockdown, but I'm looking forward to them hopefully quite soon when I'm allowed over to collect them. And the second Ark of Taste one is Hardy's Mill, which we're having this evening. And Hardy's Mill have the native bred Aberdeen Angus beef and make their haggis with their beef. We've suggested some other butchers for you as well. And if you haven't tried them, or you haven't had your haggis yet, some of them may well still have them in stock this week. So for your own enjoyment and also to support the local producers, do give them a go because they are absolutely delicious. And I think you'll agree with me that, you know, the story of the haggis is a wonderful story, a healthy dish. They freeze well, so you can buy up half a dozen of those from one of your suppliers and stash them away. They're not just for Burns night, they're for all year. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Wendy. So we move now from the main course to the pudding, and I'll hand over to Nia to give us something about the Snowden pudding, isn't it?
It is indeed, and I taped this earlier because I thought I better, not risk it in case there was a problem with the Wi-Fi here. So I think Shane is going to show you me attempting to make Snowden pudding, because what I felt was that as you could see, Snowden from Ynys Llanddwyn, where Santes Dwynwen, the saint of lovers in Wales, went as a hermit, I thought it was very apt. It was that pudding, and of course such a cold night as well. So Shane, if you wouldn't mind. And here we have all the ingredients for making a Snowden pudding. We have some breadcrumbs, some suet, some corn flour, raisins, cherries. They can be cut up, but caster sugar, some milk. In fact, what I will do, I'll mix the dry ingredients all together, and there's half a teaspoon of dried cinnamon, and it's looking good. It's such an easy pudding, this. So if you've got 10 minutes, that's all you need. And here we have the grated rind of lemon. Freshly grated, delicious smell. And here we have 2 eggs. Add the 2 eggs, beat them in. Normally, of course, I wouldn't have all these dishes, but it makes life much easier if you have everything prepped, rather than dashing back and forth. And I suppose, in a way, the whole idea is that this pudding looks like the rocks and the terrain of Snowden, which you can see from Ynys Llanddwyn, where Santes Dwynwen spent her years in exile. Lastly, the milk. And a special ingredient. In most recipes for Snowden pudding, it mentions marmalade. But in Mrs. Beaton's recipe book, the ingredient she uses is jam, apricot jam, or here I've used an Arc of Taste product, the Denbigh plum, which is Wales's only native plum, and 2 years ago received a PDO, a protected status, just as Hallen which I have here, Anglesey sea salt, which also has a PDO. And here we have the mixture. It's quite liquid, and we now put it in a greased pudding bowl. Most of my pudding bowls seem to have gone missing. I think after Christmas, I think I posted out a number of Christmas puddings to friends throughout the country, and there we go. Now, this is ready for steaming for 2 hours, or I have seen in a number of recipe books that you can put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes, leave it, but I much prefer to put it in the oven to steam while you're steaming a roast dinner. So there we are. I shall now put it in the oven and we'll come back when we've got the finished item. Thank you. Well, after all the weeks of preparation of getting this pudding absolutely, first class, well, they say never work with children, animals, or doing cookery demonstrations, because unfortunately the pudding has gone a bit awry. But hold on, let me I have an Aga which doesn't really behave itself very well, so unfortunately it doesn't look like Snowden today. But the one I made before at the weekend was absolutely perfect. It was spot on. It was lovely and moist and light, even though there was so much breadcrumbs and suet in it. And I didn't cut the cherries into small pieces. And having the cherries whole was so much nicer than having chopped cherries. So I think, I don't think we'll be sharing this or cutting it up. It's been in the Aga for about 6 hours now. So there's something wrong with my Aga. But I hope you've had a good laugh. But if you'd like the recipe, don't worry, the best chefs had disasters. But it'll taste nice anyway, with a bit of double cream, a little bit of custard, or on its own. It'll be lovely.
It's really sad to see Snowden melting like that.
Oh well, there we are.
Anyway, thanks very much, dear. We're moving now from food onto the reason why we're having the celebration tonight. There are 2 traditions, one in each country, and we'll start off looking at Burns. If you'd like to cue the video, Shane. The Burns Supper is a celebration of the life and achievements and impact that Robert Burns has had on Scotland and perhaps many other places in the world. It always takes place on the anniversary of his birthday, which is tonight. And it can take the form either of a very informal haggis, neeps and tatties at home, or it's also evolved into a fairly structured formal event, which can be quite large. Now, the way that these formal events take place is that once the guests have arrived and are seated comfortably, then we will say grace. And the grace that's used for this is one written by Robert Burns, and it's called the Selkirk Grace. And it goes like this. Some hae meat and cannot eat, and some would eat that want it. But we hae meat, and we can eat. Say, let the Lord be thanked. Now, this is followed by the entry of the haggis. Now, the haggis is usually brought in by the cook or chef, and is always accompanied by a piper, who will then parade the haggis round the room so that the attendees can get a good look at it. And then he will put the haggis in a central table where everyone can see what's going to happen next, which is the address to the haggis. Now, this is another poem written by Robert Burns, but it's always delivered in a very flamboyant style with great gusto. Now, it's a fairly long poem, so what I'll just do is give you a couple of verses of it. So the first verse is, "Therefore, your honest sonsy face, great chieftain of the Pudding race, aboon them all ye tak your place, bench triper firm, weel are ye worthy of a grace as lang's my arm." And then he will take out a knife and he will plunge it into the haggis, and he will rip open the casing and see all the internal haggis meat coming out. His knife, you see rustic labour dight, and cut you up with ready sleight, trenching your gushing entrails bright, like ony ditch. And then, oh, what a glorious sight, warm, reeking, rich. When the address to the haggis is finished, there will be a toast to the haggis, of course, because any opportunity for a toast is gratefully accepted in any Burns gathering. Then the haggis will be piped away, and it'll get getting ready to be plated up as part of the main meal. Now, after the meal, there's a number of entertainments that take place, but the first thing that will happen will be the formal celebration, if you like, of Burns's life and impact, and that's called the Immortal Memory. It doesn't have a particular format for it, but usually people will perhaps give a summary of some aspects of Burns's life and maybe relate it to the current environment. And of course, at the end of the keynote speech, there's another opportunity for a toast. Following the Immortal Memory, there's an opportunity to have perhaps some of Robert Burns's songs, or perhaps some more of the poems. It's a particular opportunity, I think, to have some of the songs which are attributed to Burns. I know there's a little bit of controversy around just now as to whether or not Robert Burns wrote absolutely everything that's attributed to him. But there are some fabulous songs that he has left for us, songs like My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose and A Fond Kiss. Following the songs, it's usually typical to have the toast to the lassies, where again this is a contemporary speech. There's no particular structure to it. And again, there will be a toast at the end of that. And there will, of course, be a reply from the lassies to give us an opportunity for yet another toast. There would be, at this point in the Burns Supper, probably a rendition of the epic poem Tam O'Shanter, which is a good 10 minutes long and is as I say, it's an epic poem about drunkenness and witchcraft. I'm not going to recite Tam O'Shanter. It would take far too long, and I would rather perhaps give a couple of verses from a different poem. One which also gives me an opportunity to introduce our next speaker. It's called To a Mouse, and it was written by Burns when he was running a farm, and when he inadvertently ran the plough over a mouse's nest and saw the mouse scurrying away. And he decided to write a little poem about it. So the poem goes like, I'll just do a couple of verses of it, and they go like this. Wee sleekit cowrin timorous beastie, oh, what a panic's in thy breastie. Thou needna start awa sae hasty, wave brithering brattle. I would be laith to rin and hazy with murdering battle. But Mousey, thou art no thy lane, in proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, and leaves us no but grief and pain for promised joy. So, as I said, that was written when he was farming on Moskill Farm. And the next speaker actually currently farms on Moskill Farm, so we'll be hearing more from him in a minute. So just to finish off the Burns Supper, it ends with a rendition of the well-known Auld Lang Syne, which again is attributed to Burns, although there is perhaps some doubt as to whether he wrote it or whether he collected it or whether he enhanced it. So that really wraps up the Burns Supper, so we'll hand back now. So there's obviously a small bit of continuity problem there because the next speaker is actually me again to give us the Welsh tradition.
And I think it's going to be a film, isn't it, again, by Shane?
Yes.
In Wales, on the 25th of January, we celebrate Santes Dwynwen Day. Dwynwen was the daughter of Brycheiniog, the king of most of Mid Wales. She met a young man called Maelon, who, after drinking a magic potion, turned into a block of ice. Dwynwen then was granted 3 wishes, and the first was to restore Maelon. The second was to give lovers protection, and the third was that she would remain unmarried. She retreated and lived as a hermit in Ynys Llanddwyn, which is on the western tip of Anglesey, near Newborough Beach. There, she built a church, and people along the centuries have visited to celebrate her and her life. I hope you will get an opportunity one day to visit Ynys Llanddwyn and marvel in the wonderful views and the peace and tranquility, and think of Dwynwen, our patron saint of lovers in Wales. Thank you. Diolch.
All right. We move back now in the direction of Burns. Unfortunately, Bryce Cunningham was unable to, when I contacted him about doing this session, he explained that he already had a Burns supper that he had to attend personally. I suspect a family affair, which it would have to be these days. And he's not going to be here to answer any questions, but by all means, still ask them. It might be that Wendy and I, who follow Bryce and Moskill quite rigorously on social media, might be able to answer some of the questions. However, if we put up the video on now, Shane, that would be excellent.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we've heard already about Burns as being perhaps a poet, a campaigner, and maybe indeed a bit of a ladies' man. But we shouldn't forget that he was brought up on a farm, and when his father died, he and his brother actually ran Moskill Farm in Ayrshire for a few years. Today, Moskill is farmed by Bryce Cunningham, who's here to talk to us today. Now, in addition to farming, Bryce also is a bit of a campaigner. So what I'll do is I'll now let him tell his story of how he got into farming and his journey so far, and maybe we can talk a wee bit about the campaigning as well. Over to you, Bryce.
Thanks very much, Walter. Thanks for the introduction. We'll just go over it very briefly again. So my name is Bryce Cunningham. If you follow us on social media, you'll know me slightly better as Farmer Bryce of Muskill Farm. My story begins here. I was born here at the farm. However, I grew up and I had absolutely no interest in farming. At the time, my father and grandfather were both dairy farmers, working together. I had no interest in it. I wanted to go and work with our local Mercedes-Benz dealership to work on fancy cars and basically try and make some money in my life and have some holidays, which farmers don't tend to be famously known for. So as soon as I left school, first opportunity I got, I was away from the farm. I rented a house in the local town of Ayr and I got a job at Mercedes-Benz of Ayr. I moved in there as an apprentice technician. I moved up the ranks into management after about 8 years, and I had visions of being able to become a general manager of 3 or 4 dealerships, and I was very much looking to move to either London or Berlin in the following 5 years after becoming a manager. In 2013, I got a phone call from my mother, and the phone call was to say that my father and my grandfather and my grandmother all had terminal life-threatening conditions, and all 3 of them are partners in the business. So, that was basically, if anything happened to them, it was game over for the family farm. So I decided that I would take 3 weeks holiday off my work, which was granted, and I went home to see if I could help out, just to see what was happening. And we discovered that my grandfather had a terminal heart condition. My dad had terminal cancer, and my gran, she was confined to a wheelchair and she wouldn't walk again. So I was sort of flung into the deep end, and I decided that I would take a year's break from Mercedes-Benz. I wouldn't go back until the things had taken their course, and we would see where the farm was and to try and help the family out. So my grandpa, he died a couple of months later, my father a year later, and my grandmother just shortly after that as well. And just a whole sequence of things happened after that. The international price for dairy collapsed, and our farm was selling milk to a buyer who was bound by the commodity international milk price. So it meant that we were basically losing £10,000 a month immediately. All our cows had been devalued because the whole country was affected by this downturn in milk prices, and we were tenant farmers, so we weren't able to sell the farm. So I was basically stuck in a situation where we couldn't sell anything, we couldn't pay off debts, but we couldn't make any money either. And so what I did was I tried to do something quite radical. I just thought, right, I'm going to take the farm on. This is obviously for me. I need to make a go of it. So we did some radical things at the time. So just to explain what the farm was at the time. So when I was born here, it was a very traditional dairy farm in Ayrshire. It had, my grandpa would grow some potatoes. They had some crops. They had about 80 odd Ayrshire cattle, and a very conventional farm for this part of the world. A very grass-based way of farming. Over the next 20 years, as I grew up and decided to go to Mercedes, my father had taken over the reins of the family business. And with the change in dairy at that time, the dairy market became more commodity driven. It became more apparent that the cows that we had to produce more and more milk to remain a viable business. So instead of having 80 cows when I had sort of grown up, when I came back to the farm in 2013 with 130 cows, the cows themselves weren't even the most important part. The most important part was trying to get the most amount of milk out of the cow to make things most efficient. So when I was born in the 80s, the cows were given, say, 18 to 22 litres per head. When I come back in 2013, the cows were averaging 35 to 40 litres per head. So their output had almost doubled, just to try and keep the farm efficient enough to be able to pay the rent and to be a viable business. Over that time as well, my father had taken on enormous debts. He had to build new sheds to try and keep up with the modern way of dairy farming. A lot more stipulations and regulations had come in that you had to follow. And in my observation, when I came back in 2013, that my grandfather and grandmother had always said, farming was never the easiest choice in life, but you always managed to make a living from it. But my father's take on it was that farming was there as a way of life. It was a way of life that had to be maintained for the family. However, it was highly stressful and it was very difficult to make any money in. And that was the side of farming that I had saw when I come back and realised that the commodity milk market price had collapsed. So just kind of fast forward, back to 2014. I had taken on this business that was losing money. I didn't see a way out. We couldn't find a way out at the time. And ultimately the bank turned around to me and said, "We're very sorry, Bryce, you've now been in farming for a year. You've lost over £100,000 in your first year of farming. You've no experience, and we're going to withdraw all the debt from the farm. So we'd like nearly £250,000 paid back in 21 days, please." And of course, that just totally wiped the business out. We were effectively bankrupted. So what we did after that was, although we are tenant farmers, we did have a small amount of land that we did own. We sold that at half the value that we should have got for it. We managed to sell quite a number of the cows. The great thing that we had was my father, although he'd been saddled with all this debt and he was pushing hard to be efficient in the dairy industry, he had a love for Ayrshire pedigree cows. And because of that love for Ayrshire pedigree cows, he was known all around the world for his cow breeding, and that allowed us to sell the cows for some value and pay off some of the debt. It didn't certainly pay off all of it, but it did pay quite a considerable amount. So as you can imagine, painting the picture, we're sitting there with no bank funding. We've got 28 Ayrshire cows left out of 130 because we had to sell most of them. And as you can imagine, we weren't able to keep the 28 best cows. It was the 28 cows that were pretty much unsellable. So the ones that farmers didn't see as the most efficient, or perhaps they had a slight defect in them in some way, had a sore foot or something that had to be fixed. And just basically these 28 cattle were what we had to work with. However, I loved them right from the very minute that I come back from that sale. I sold 100 and just thought, this is the future of this deal. So we milked for 28 cows. I decided that I didn't want to be part of the commodity milk market anymore and handed my notice into my milk buyer to say we would no longer be supplying them. And we had nothing to lose at the time, so I decided that we would install a pasteuriser to pasteurise my milk. Now it sounds something fancy, but it was effectively a yogurt maker with a pipe put in the bottom of it so that we could heat up the milk, cool it down, and then put it into a jug. And that's how we started, with something that was no bigger than this, and we were pouring milk in the top, pasteurising it, bottling it, and then delivering it by hand to the nearest shop. And I just felt that there was a real sustainable way forward for this. So I decided that we would buy a bigger pasteuriser once we managed to get demand up, and we would start knocking doors on larger establishments, bigger shops, coffee shops. And it took us a long time, but we did get a break when we finally moved into supplying a cafe in Glasgow, completely out of the blue. We got a phone call one day from a cafe called McEwen Smith in Glasgow, and they said they were delighted because they had heard through the grapevine that a small farm in Ayrshire was processing their own milk from Ayrshire cows, and they really wanted to support something. And the only thing that was missing for them was they were really wanting us to be organic. And I'm glad I took that phone call that day, because I turned around and said, well, we've actually just signed the documents to become an organic farm in 2 years' time, so I'll come and see you. So off I went to Glasgow and gave them a sample of the milk to try, had a bit of a chat. And while we were having a chat, we discovered, because the milk had been handed over to the barista behind the bar that day, that our milk frothed extremely well in a specialty coffee situation. So just to explain to those that don't know, specialty coffee is a sort of different world to the sort of the best of the good stuff you can buy at the supermarket. So specialty coffee is a significant following right across the world. It's coffee roasters working with small farms and small cooperatives to try and drive fairness into the coffee industry, whilst also bringing the highest quality coffee from farms in the areas that can grow coffee and generally in areas of high poverty, and bring this very high quality product into places like Scotland or England or Australia, America, various different places. And this scene had just really taken off in Scotland, just as we'd realised there was a market there for small scale milk production. So the milk we were producing, what we discovered was that because we had Ayrshire cows and because we were processing them or pasteurising our milk in a very unique way, and just to explain that to you, the very unique way is it's actually processed more like craft beer as opposed to milk in a conventional milk factory. And it means that the way we process is very gentle. It gives the milk a totally unique flavour, and it also maintains most of the benefits of the raw milk, the flavour, the profile and the nutrition of the raw milk that comes out of the cow to start with. So we discovered that when you're frothing the milk in specialty coffee, the microfoam stays very stable. The high fat content works with the bitter flavours of the coffee to try and reduce that, to try and give it a more sweet flavour. And it also actually removes the need for some people who are taking, say, 1 sugar with their coffee. They actually decide they didn't need any sugar because the sweetness of the milk come through with the coffee, and they decided they didn't do it that way. So we certainly stumbled onto something very exciting there. Now, from McEwen Smith had emailed some of their friends to say we've found this dairy farm in Ayrshire, and we're wanting to get the word out. And we very quickly moved into 30 coffee shops. Then that turned into 100 coffee shops, and today we're now supplying over 380 coffee shops, not just in Glasgow or Ayrshire, but right across the central belt of Scotland and into Aberdeen and Inverness now. So yes, we're very lucky to be where we are, and we've been very lucky that we sort of stumbled into McEwen Smith that day with where we bought the milk and their specialty coffee. But it's much more than that with what we're trying to do here at Mesquil Farm. We grew our business very quickly over the first 18 months, so much so that we actually, those 28 cows weren't supplying enough milk for us. And I had a real dilemma of what I wanted to do. So here at Mesquil, we decided we were going to become an organic farm. However, we had to sell the land that we owned and give up a lot of rented land. So it left us with only 200 acres, which meant we could only really carry an absolute maximum of about 80 milking cows. And 80 milking cows wouldn't have given the amount of milk we needed to supply all these coffee shops. So what I did is I took a bit of a step back, and I realised that there was 2 other organic dairy farms in Ayrshire that had started at the same time as us. And they started for the same reasons. They had been hammered by the conventional milk market, and they just wanted a more sustainable income and a more sustainable future for their family and for their farms. And of course, there's always the added benefit of the environmental aspect of organic farming as well, which I'll be absolutely honest, me personally, I didn't buy into that to start with. I did it for different reasons, but once I saw the difference in the farm, I've totally bought into organic farming and realised the importance of it. And as have the other 2 farms. And because of that, because we've been working together and we've all sort of came to the realisation at the same time, we decided to work together. So we now purchase the milk of these 2 other organic farms as well. And we have been since 2018. Even more excitement happened in 2019 as the word sort of spread that we were trying to create this very different brand where we're trying to get this highly nutritious milk, a very different flavour, a very, very unique take on it. In 2019, we also decided to ditch single-use plastics. So none of our milk is supplied in single-use plastics. All of the milk is supplied in either glass pint bottles, glass 2-litre bottles, or in larger containers that we can use for milk vending machines or in a commercial setting for the likes of coffee shops, cheese makers or ice cream makers. So that's up to 50-litre cans. But the most important thing is every type of packaging we have can be returned to the farm, washed out, reused and then sent back out. So we have 0 single-use plastic since January 25th, 2019. And the culmination of that is in December the 1st there, we did a calculation and we'd actually saved over 2.2 million 2-litre single-use plastic bottles from going to landfill or recycling or wherever they end up. And I'm really quite proud that myself and my small team here have managed to achieve that in such a small window of time. In 2019, that's what we did. We went single-use plastic free, and believe it or not, it was actually the worst business decision I've ever made. Overnight, we lost about 40% of all our customers. So by February 2019, we were really scratching our heads, thinking we'd made the biggest mistake. But my team was not my team. Our team was round about us, and saying, there is a future here. We need to just stick in and go on with it. A lot of the cafes and coffee shops really did not like the reusable aspect of milk. They didn't like the idea that they stored dirty milk tubs and containers in their shop, or they didn't have the space for it. So we had a lot of learning to do, a lot of training to do, and we ended up, all of us in the team here were going around coffee shops and showing them how to, work with reusable packaging to wash out the bottles and make sure they're stored in a separate bit. And it just took a lot of work to get off the ground for us. But luckily it did work. 6 months later, we were selling more milk again, and we invited yet another 2 dairy farms from Dumfries and Galloway into the fold as well. So we're now actually supporting 5 organic dairy farms in the southwest of Scotland to provide Mesquil milk, which is now going right across the central belt of Scotland as well. And then that sort of took us up to the first lockdown of COVID. And just like every single other business out there, we were absolutely hammered on the 23rd of March last year. We basically just watched our whole business crumble. We watched everyone cancelling their milk deliveries and basically having to shut up shop. And so we all kind of sat down together and we put our heads together to see what we could do. And what we come up with was we realised that there was an awful lot of issues with the home delivery service offered by supermarkets locally. So you may remember supermarkets were selling out, the shelves were bare, people couldn't get delivery slots for home deliveries. So all of the companies that had supported us for the previous 4 years that were manufacturing goods, we phoned them up and said, look, if you can continue to produce what you're producing, could we buy it from you and then try and sell it to the local communities? It's more like a system that we would have had 100 years ago where farmers would work together to try and form micro co-ops to try and get goods out to the local communities. And we just felt that model may just get us through COVID. And I mean, to be honest, we were absolutely overwhelmed. We launched this and we worked all weekend on our website to try and sort out this new way of working that we could have a direct link straight to the customer. And we started selling across our website. We'd up and running the Monday morning. We had 3 people in the office that day just to try and keep on top of the emails and the phone calls with people loving the new idea, and the people that were genuinely stuck in their home were really scared of what was happening with COVID. They couldn't get to the supermarkets, and if they did get to the supermarkets, there was nothing left to buy anyway. So we started selling really weird things. Toilet paper at one point was a crazy thing. We sent a van to Glasgow. We got a full van of toilet paper, and it was all gone the next day because everything sold out of toilet paper. We started getting loads of. I managed to find an organic pasta supplier. One of the bakeries that we worked with, they supplied us with sourdough bread and sort of artisan breads that they dropped the price of, and we took a very small margin as well, because at the end of the day, it wasn't just us who were being affected. The people at home had been affected as well at the time. So we felt it really wasn't the right thing to do to keep a high margin. So we all agreed we needed to cover our costs, we needed to help our communities out, and that was exactly what we did. And from there, we worked for about 4 months at that. We actually had a visit from the BBC One show. They came to see what we were doing as well. They were quite excited by it, with not just for us, but with all the suppliers we were working in as well. It's actually kept us going, and I believe about another 5 companies as well, just having this change in business model to supply doorstep deliveries. Everything started to open back up again last August when the first lockdown was lifted, and we had never been busier. We were supplying more and more milk into coffee shops and to home deliveries at the same time. Again, we added on another dairy farm, so that was 6 dairy farms that we were then supporting. And the one thing that I really did notice was that there seemed to be a significant shift in people's attitudes towards Scottish and local food at the time. People had realised who not just we were, but who other small producers were in the area. There seemed to be a genuine attempt to try and support local businesses in the local communities. And I sort of had a bit of an epiphany there. I thought to myself, we are still a very small business at the end of the day. We're supporting 6 farms. In the wider dairy industry, we're nothing. We're basically doing in a year what one of those big dairies is doing in 2 days. And I thought to myself, there might be an opportunity here that we could do something big. We could do something not to become a massive conglomerate of a large multinational company and do the same as they did and try to be greedy. What we could do is try and find a way to keep small farmers farming in a small way. So for people who they may only have a farm or a croft of 30, 50, 100, 200, 300 acres, but they don't want to get any bigger. They just want to work with their cows, their family, and work with nature to produce food in a very environmentally friendly way. And there's no one out there, to my knowledge, that's supporting anything like that at the minute. So I genuinely believe that with Mesquil, we can turn Mesquil into a platform to work with small farmers to be able to sell their products right across Scotland, and indeed one day you never know where we might end up. However, that's the vision that I'm chasing right now. So I sort of come up with that vision back in September. I sat down with the team here at Mesquil and discussed what we wanted to do. And I don't think I've ever seen so many people so excited in the office at once. So it was great feedback for me. So our plan is, so just to give you a brief insight into the business today. Today we are selling 1.5 million litres of milk per year. And our vision is by 2025 to be selling 10 million litres of organic milk per year, all from small family organic farms in Scotland. And we've asked them for a few stipulations as well. A couple of the stipulations are that they must not shoot bull calves on farm or export bull calves into the continent through live exports. So that's one of the biggest things for us. We have asked them all that they must be genuinely looking to reduce their carbon effect on the atmosphere. So that's looking at renewable technologies, looking at more efficient machinery for their dairies or for their farms, etc. It's something that we're sort of trying to work with the farmers together to achieve together, if you like. I mean, we are not exempt here. I mean, obviously we've still got a dairy farm, and we are looking at ways of decarbonising our whole farm as well as the supply chain. And the reason that we're asking that of the farmers and to come back to us through a consultation about how they can do so is that by 2025, we genuinely believe that just in 4 years' time, we could actually be the first dairy in Scotland to be carbon neutral. And if we can find scientists who are far more clever than I that can prove carbon sequestration at the rates that I believe it's happening, we could actually become a carbon negative farm or a carbon negative business by that point as well. However, I don't have the funding to go and chase that at the minute, and I'm not a scientist, so that might be a win in the back burner at the minute. So we'll see how we go on. I think I've flung quite a lot of information out there.
That's fascinating. One of the things that I've noticed as we've been going through the lockdown, the various lockdown scenarios, as things eased off, I was looking to see whether people were going to stay with local or whether they were going to go back to the supermarkets. And to a large extent, people did seem to go back to the supermarket, certainly in Edinburgh. Yes. Some of the businesses retained new custom, but you didn't get the queues outside the local shops that we certainly had in March and April. Yes. Did you have that same observation as well with the way that your business was running?
Yes, I absolutely did. So I've actually got numbers here. I thought you would ask the question. So during the first lockdown, we took on almost 1,000 customers directly. So that's the customers in the 8 villages round about us. That was people that couldn't get to supermarkets or were perhaps self-isolating or quarantining, for example. Today we're down that's dropped down to 603. So it's easy maths. It's just about 40% of the customers that we lost. Now, we didn't expect something like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, we are a premium product. Our milk is almost double the price of what it is in supermarkets. All of the products that we sell, which are local and organic, they're also significantly more expensive than what they are in the supermarkets. However, the thing that I've realised is the 60% of people that stuck with us, the feedback we get is we do launch surveys with our supporters, and the feedback we're getting from them is that they didn't realise how much of a quality difference can be found between what they're finding conventionally produced in their supermarkets and what they're finding in their local doorstep as well. So, you know, although we didn't keep anyone near as many people as we'd have liked to, there is a significant amount of people still sticking with us and realising that, you know, we are that farm at the end of the road, or, you know, the egg suppliers at the other side of the village, or, you know, these things that the bakers got a first name, you know, it's all these kind of things that people are appreciating. But, you know, I think we've still got a lot more work to do. I think, you know, it's something that Slow Food bangs on about a lot, and along with a lot of other groups, people understand the cost of food, but they don't understand the value of food. You know, I think that personally, I feel if I've got responsibility as a growing business, and I've got aspirations to grow this business to quite a significant size, so I believe it's my responsibility to get the marketing out there, to shout about local products, and work with other businesses to really push as hard as we can. I think that although there's a lot of people doing great things in our industry, I think that we really do need to concentrate on marketing a lot better to explain to people the work that's being done out there. I think people get lost a lot in marketing from these businesses, and I think we need to find a way of matching that. But obviously we don't have the budgets, but I think we're quite clever about it and get into people's homes the way that it should be.
Sorry, the dog started to bark. I'm trying to quiet it down. But what I was going to say there is you've got a super platform there that you can use to try and influence the industry. Are there any opportunities to influence the government, for example, to try and get them to maybe change some of their policies, or try and get them to help support what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I feel as if I need to operate full disclosure a wee bit. I'm on 2 government committees. They're not directly related to food procurement or anything like that. However, they are to do with climate change. I'm in 2 climate change groups. And one of the things that I am fighting for through these groups is a much shorter supply chain and the value of local farmers with massive diversity on farm. So by that, just what I mean is, 100 years ago, or even 80 years ago, when my grandfather first came to Misgila in 1948, he didn't just have a dairy, and it wasn't just growing grass. It was a farm where he had potatoes, he had carrots, he had leeks, he had sheep, he had goats, he had cows, he had a total diversity of everything. And the reason for that was, if milk wasn't doing good that year, he always had a backup with beef, or he had sheep, or he had these vegetables, or he had something else. And back then you could do that. There was the value was seen in food back then to do that. However, nowadays the value isn't seen in that, and the issue is people are now pushing for growth because they believe that they perhaps don't believe big is beautiful, but they think that efficiency is the only way to go forward. But thinking of pure efficiency, you're not then thinking about the environmental or the economic aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're now seeing farms growing, which, I'm not just talking about livestock farms here, I'm not talking about arable as well. You're seeing apple farms that are ripping out hedgerows because their tractors are so big, because they're so efficient that they can't turn in the fields. They don't want a 10-acre field, they want a 1,000-acre field. Or you're seeing dairy farms that perhaps they had 100 cows 10 years ago, they've now got 1,000 cows, and they don't have enough ground to keep those cows, so they're now in a shed 24 hours a day. Or you're seeing the opposite of that, you're seeing people buying up large amounts of land, and they're running extensive New Zealand-based farming system with, 2,000 cows, but they're getting small paddocks round about, very similar to what we're doing here. But the fact is, it's no longer small family farms or small community-driven farms. It's now massive farms, and are turning into massive businesses. And there's arguments out there. I sit in one of these climate change groups, and I get highly frustrated because there's someone who thinks the exact opposite of me. They believe that what we should do is we should rewild the whole of Scotland, and we should concentrate with animal agriculture in very small areas, like factory farming, and a more American-based sort of concentrated animal feedlot operations. He's got an argument for that say if we take dairy, for example, those cows will be punching out far more milk than any other cow based on an extensive grazing system. And because of that one cow can replace 3 cows, and therefore she's producing less methane per animal than anything else. But my argument right back at him is, where are the crops coming to feed that cow to try and get that level of high production, and what environmental damage has been done at that end? So I don't believe this is a very clear-cut way of dealing with issues. But I think we need to have far more research done on carbon sequestration to work out exactly what is actually happening in Scotland and what is the way forward. Now, just to give you another stat, one of the documents that came out was the breakdown of emissions in agriculture, and the breakdown showed us that 60% of emissions were coming from the beef sector, 24% was coming from crops, and 14% was coming from dairy, with the rest made up of pigs and poultry and smaller scale operations. Now, the thing that I found alarming to that is when the Scottish Government started talking about carbon sequestration and other carbon sinks, they only took in peat bogs and trees. They ignored agriculture. And the reason they ignored agriculture was because they were saying that the data is not consistent. There's not enough research being done. Now, to me, in a country like Scotland, where 87% of the land is deemed as not fit for further agricultural use other than grazing, then it really starts ringing alarm bells that we are not measuring carbon sequestration at grassland level, considering most of our country has grass. So I think that I might be proved completely wrong. I might be proved that cattle are causing 100% of all the agricultural emissions, and everything's a massive problem, and grass isn't sequestrating carbon. But I personally don't believe that yet, and I'd like to see more research done on it. And it's something that I'm fighting to have done at Scottish Government level as well.
You've got a fair task on your hands there, and on top of that, you've got to run a farm. It's I guess to take things a wee bit back towards Burns, it seems that the thing that you're trying to do is to either retain or encourage farming in the way that Burns would probably have done when he was farming your farm. It's certainly, I mean, he probably wouldn't recognise the things if he came back, but he might taste the milk tasting the same as when he was farming the farm. Yeah, I think we probably need to draw it to a close now. A fascinating talk, Bryce. And I really appreciate you giving up the time, because I know that you're very busy with all of the various things that you're doing just now. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much for that. I mean, you're the kind of things that you're doing are just exactly the kind of things that we would like to see happening. And it's great to see you having success and influencing people to be able to do that. So thanks a lot. And congratulations to you and Ashley on the engagement.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. We just have going on this year. We just thought I would add that in.
Okay. Yes, a very passionate young man. It's probably the first time I've ever seen so many slow food qualities in one person and actually making things happen. It's very impressive. Right, questions. We've had a couple of questions that have been going through, which either myself or Shane have already answered. There was one that you were going to reply to, Nia.
I think I replied. It was about the jam. It's the Vale of Clwyd Denby Plum PDO, and what happens in jam, and it's a festival we have in October every year. Of course, we didn't last year. We may or we may not this year. And we have various small producers in the area producing jams, chutneys, bread, marshmallows, gin, vodka, not whiskey yet, but lots of different produce. And I just happened to have a pot of this jam, and I thought, as it was an Ark of Taste product, I needed to promote it with you this evening.
Right. The other question is one for Bryce, and it's really boiling down to whether unhomogenized or organic should be the primary driver for milk, as sort of, I suppose, speciality milk, as it almost is. And I know that the way that it's evolved for Bryce is it started off as being unhomogenized and has evolved into organic, but that was largely not an accident of timing, but it just takes time to become officially labeled organic. So it was homogenation was not was the primary thing that drove it, and that's also the differentiator that helped them be able to be able to sell so much to the coffee shops. And organic was, I mean, not just an add-on, but was always in the plan to do that. So what I'll do is I'll copy that question and email it to Bryce, and maybe he can make a direct reply to you. It's Candace. Candace, if you can give me an email address, I'll get Bryce to reply directly. If Candace is still there.
Candice is one of our Wales members. Oh,
okay.
So we have a way of getting in contact with her.
Oh, okay, that's good. Right. Just to see if there's anything else on the comment side. See if there's anything that needs to be answered. Okay, looks pretty good. Yep, I think that's about it. So I think just to go back to Bryce's thing for just a minute. I mean, he didn't mention a few things that he's been doing recently as well. He's opened up a coffee shop. I mean, that's not something you do lightly, but he's just decided that, well, I need to sell some more milk, so I'll open a coffee shop, and he just does it. Oh, and it also, of course, sells all of the local goods that he's been delivering up till now. The other thing that I'm hoping you're able to see this, maybe have to put this white paper behind it. The milk bottle has a picture of Robert Burns on it. So I think you can see that. Right, now that's it's actually an extremely good advert for him, but it also costs him because the bottle is so attractive that there's never the same number coming back as go out. And many of the bottles that he's got now, all the ones that I've been getting for the last 2 or 3 weeks, don't have this advert on it because he's had to buy in and not has had time to get the Moscow Burns logo on it. He's a very clever man, and you can tell he's passionate. It's really terrific to hear him. Anyway, I'd like to pass over to Mia, who's going to do a wrap up for us.
Thank you, Walter. Now, it was a few months ago that I came up with this bright idea that we would have a celebration between Scotland and Wales because we have 2 very important events on the same evening. Burns, of course, which everybody's heard about, and Santes Dwynwen, which probably has become more popular in the last 20 years, and far more cards sent, gifts, flowers, romantic meals. And it's been fantastic to share this evening with you, our Celtic brothers and sisters, and fantastic opportunity to work together, because that's what slow food is all about, is working together, sharing ideas and helping each other along. And hopefully you've had as much fun doing this as I have, even though it has been rather stressful, especially when my pudding flopped. Never mind, it'll taste fine. My husband won't notice. Anyway, thank you to Walter for all that you've done in the last few weeks, helping with all the technical advice and getting everybody together. Thanks to Wendy for all the work that you've done, getting the haggises sorted. And I did actually order 2 haggis from Scotland that came, and my family and I, we've actually enjoyed them before this this get together. They were absolutely delicious, and I've got another one in the freezer. Thanks also to Bryce, even though he's not here with us in person, but he'll see this vote of thanks. And then there's somebody in the background who, if it weren't for Shane, this would not have happened. Shane Holland, who is the chair of UK, does so much work in the background, and if it wasn't for him, Terra Madre Fringe wouldn't have existed. And this evening, thank you so much on behalf of everybody in Slow Food. I'll hold my whiskey glass to you. Can I also mention to you that on the 4th of February, there will be another Terra Madre Fringe event, this time with Slow Food Berkshire and Wiltshire. And there'll be an opportunity to listen to a talk about Brinkworth Dairies cheese and Eincombe flour, which is another Ark of Taste product. And that's free, but if you want to participate in tasting the cheese and having some of the flour, there is a cost involved, but of course that supports the small businesses. By the weekend, all this fun and drama will be on YouTube, so you can re-watch us and share and make fun, and somebody will make millions of the flopping Snowden pudding. So in the meantime, thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn I bawb. Thank you everyone, and I'm going to now enjoy with some other Welsh Anglesey delicacies, which are the oldest biscuits apparently in existence, which are our Belfrau Cakes, and the the pilgrims used to take them from Anglesey to Santiago de Compostela. So maybe that's another evening, a fun evening. So there we are, Iechyd da from Glenmorangie. Iechyd da. Thank you everybody for a wonderful evening.